In this lesson, we're going to learn about date tags. These are very helpful for displaying the date of different posts and things like that, but there are some tricky things with them that we do need to talk about. So when it comes to working with date tags, we basically have two types. We have the date along with the modified date. So you could give this post was last updated on, for example. And then we have the time and the modified time. So at first glance, you might think, okay, the date would display the date and the time would display the time. But they both accept a parameter that allows you to format them to do the exact same thing. So really the difference is going to be one key difference that is pretty important, and we're going to hop over into the documentation to talk about it from here. So here we are on the date documentation, and this line here is what I want to point out. It says the date template tag will only output the date if the current post date is different from the previous one. So if we're on a blog listing page and we have 3 posts that were posted on the same day, it will only list the date for the first post and not for the later ones. So this can be some very unexpected behavior for folks, and for this reason, it's generally considered a better practice to use the time. And notice that this is passing in a parameter of D for the date format, the same for the date here, although this can also use before and after and whether to be echoed. But in this case, it's going to need, in both cases, you're going to need to use a PHP date format. So what I want to give you here is a link to formatting date and time in WordPress. And notice that the string you're going to pass in looks just like some normal characters. And when WordPress sees certain characters, it's going to display certain things. However, if that's not a recognized character, like a comma, these will display as normal commas. So this chart here is going to be your guide, and I would say most people don't memorize this whole thing, although they might begin to memorize some specific ones, but really you just keep this link up or you search WordPress date format and you'll get here pretty easily, and this will let you determine a completely custom display of how you want the date to be. And because we're going to pass this into the time on a blog listing page, it'll display it for every post. So let's come into our code and look at a basic example of this in action. So what I've done in my byline.php is I've added a new line date that has the time along with this parameter being passed of, I'll take this out for now, of F, capital F, lowercase j, and the upper and lowercase do matter, comma, y. So let's take a look at what this is going to output for us on the front end of the site. So what we could see now, this is a little small, so I'll zoom in. The date is set to the date, it has the month written out, the date, and then the year. So notice that anything that is a recognized character, it's going to output, but the things that it doesn't, like a comma, it will just output them directly. So you could play around with date formats quite a bit, but I want to show you a difference here between what the date and the time does, just so that you could see an example working to talk about it. So I have some posts here in March that were all on the same day. Notice March 15th, and it's displaying the date for each of those. If I were to come into my code and change this from the date to the time, they both take the first same parameter, so that's fine. Notice that now the date only appears here and not here. This is what I meant by the unexpected behavior. If WordPress is in a loop and it sees that the date is the same and you're using the date, it will only output it the first time. So because that's a little unexpected, I think you should probably use the time. Although if you come across an instance where you need this to happen, the date does it by default. So there you go. I will say that one place you might do this is if you were displaying maybe the date real big and then titles below it, the date would only show up in the first case. So then they would be grouped together. So that might be a helpful instance of how this might be a positive way to use the date and expected behavior in that case. But otherwise, if you're listing kind of the title and then date as metadata, that might not be what you're expecting. So at this point, what I would suggest doing is looking over the formatting date and time link. This is something that will allow you to basically set up any date in any format. And I would actually suggest playing around and practicing a little bit. So open up the example file and this link and go ahead and try changing things around to how you might expect, some cool dates, stuff like that, just so you get comfortable with how this works.